Howdy and welcome to Accessibility in Aggieland. The session today is titled Accessibility in Student Affairs, and Dr. Kristie Orr and Justin Romack from Disability Resources will be sharing more about their topic and our presentation with all of us in a moment. Again, my name is Megan Orsag, and I'm the co-director at the Center on Disability and Development. And Accessibility in Aggieland is a collaboration and partnership between our Center on Disability and Development and the Disability Resources Department here at Texas A&M. And our hope is that we would share information, strategies, and skills, and just have a conversation about accessibility in the hopes that we would equip others to be able to address any barriers that might be present and have a conversation themselves to be able to promote accessibility and belonging in Aggieland and beyond, because accessibility is all of our responsibilities. And so I want to thank you for being here, and I'm going to ask Dr. Orr and Justin Romack to please introduce themselves and the topic.
Thanks, Megan. My name is Kristie Orr, and I'm the Director of Disability Resources here on campus. So we are a department in the Division of Student Affairs, which is why this is called Accessibility in Student Affairs. But I think whether you're actually in student affairs as part of the division or in any unit that's serving students, you'll find something that you can use, hopefully multiple things that you can use in your work to make sure that the work that you do is more accessible. And I'm going to let Justin introduce himself, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, howdy. My name is Justin Romack, and I am an assistant director with Disability Resources. It's always a joy to be able to have these kinds of conversations. As Kristie mentioned, my hope is that you walk away with something that you can implement today. You can roll into your work today and get something practical to support your students and to support accessibility. So I'm super happy to be a part of the conversation. And I will just jump us straight into our conversation here. When I emailed out event details yesterday, I really emphasized this idea of coming to the table, coming to the discussion today with a program or event or resource that you are working on right now, or that you see in the very near future, because we want that practicality, we want that applicability. And so I have a slide here that says, what events or programs are you planning? We've got a little calendar. I would really like to know whether you want to drop it in the chat or you want to unmute and let us know what is something that you're coming to the table with today that you hope you can make more accessible through this discussion. And so we'll pause here for just a couple minutes. And Megan, if you spot anything in the chat, totally let us know. And again, if you want to unmute, you're more than welcome to do that as well.
We have one event of a meet and greet.
That's exciting.
Yeah, another is looking to make exhibits more accessible with the art collections here on campus.
Love it.
Another mentioned leadership retreats. Ooh, and the major tailgate party. I'd like to go to that one. Workshops, open house / showcase. Another mentioned workshop presentations for graduate and professional students. Another mentioned vet camp, extended orientation dinner. Looking to make onboarding for new employees more accessible. Excellent. We have several, quote, behind the scenes events and tailgating coming up this fall.
Yeah, I love that. A mix, right? A mix of folks, professionals, experiences, skills, all of these things that you all are working on, they require space, they require information, and they require interaction. And so we're going to look at some technical and some practical ways that we can make those experiences and those resources more accessible. And I love some of the things that you all are coming to the table with. So I don't know if you want to add anything here, Kristie, or you want to just jump ahead, but I love where we're starting.
Yeah. Well, just wanting to add that definitely we want this to be more interactive. I know it's hard over Zoom. We have been participants in Zoom too, but we appreciate everyone who's interacting so far. We're going to come back to the things that you've indicated. So if you maybe hadn't had time between yesterday and today to think about how you might apply this, be thinking as we go through these slides, because we're going to want you to come back and think about those things. If you have questions as we go, please feel free to raise your hand. Justin and I are very informal in how we present, and we want to make sure that when you leave here, as Justin said, you've got stuff that is answering your questions that you can actually do. So feel free to reach out and let us know if you've got some other things that you think about as we go, or other questions. So we like to always share our mission anytime we present. And so Disability Resources mission is that our Disability Resources staff members interact and collaborate with faculty, staff, and students to achieve an equitable learning environment for students with disabilities at Texas A&M University. Something that's really important to note about our mission is that the order of faculty, staff, and students is intentional. So we feel like it is important for us to be proactive in looking at accessibility on campus. So as much as we can help faculty to design their courses to be accessible, and staff members to think about programs, spaces, interactions that they have with students to be accessible, then there's less need for students to have accommodations or to be treated differently than other students. And, you know, we kind of jokingly say, if we do our job really well, we won't have a job anymore, because there'll be no need for our office, because students with disabilities will have that same access everyone else has, and they won't need anything different. We say that because we know that's not going to happen in our lifetimes. It takes a lot of work, but there can be a lot of things that we can do, just little things that can make things more accessible for students. So it may be helpful to think a little bit about the trends that we're seeing here in our office. Most of the students that are registered with our office have invisible disabilities. So we're seeing more students who have mental health, so depression, anxiety, panic disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, any kind of mental health disability, or chronic health conditions. We see a lot of students that have diabetes, seizure disorders, any kind of digestive disorder, cancer, any kind of health condition that might make it difficult for them to be able to participate in classes or activities on campus like everyone else. And more students with autism. So that's a number that's growing. You've probably heard that. And then also we have more students with learning disabilities. So what that means is that you will not necessarily know that a student has a disability when you see them. So that's another reason really to be proactive and thinking about students with disabilities and accessibility when you are planning events or programs or sending emails or anything where accessibility is going to come into play, because there may be students that never tell you that they have a disability or that they need something different. And if you've been proactive and thought about accessibility, there may be no need for them to tell you that they have a disability. And we are seeing that there is more awareness about the right to have an accessible experience, both from people on campus, so both from faculty members and staff members and administrators, and from students themselves. So it's pretty exciting for us when we do a program and people come because they want to learn how to be more accessible. And we also know that students are more likely to speak up and say, hey, I have a right to this, because they have learned that they do have a right to have an accessible educational experience. And so that means that we need to make sure that we're thinking about that.
So, keeping with the trend of some interaction and trying to get our conversation going, we'll have a couple of breaks where we have some of these quick polls. We'll do a little bit of a quiz, if you will. On the screen, I've got a QR code, but you are also more than welcome to go to menti.com, so MENTI.com, and enter the code 11450902. I'm going to head over to our Menti poll and open that real quick. Because we want to ask a question of you. Hold on just a second. Right. There we go. So we want to ask a question of you about language. How should I refer to disability in conversation? And so you have person first language, identity first language, varies from situation to situation, or I just avoid talking about disability. So I'm going to open this poll real quick, and going to show our results as they come in. We'll give you just a minute or so to respond to this. Kristie, you're seeing this on your screen, correct?
I am. It's kind of fun to see the numbers go up and down.
In a minute here, we'll shut voting down. If you don't mind kind of talking about what we see here, that'd be great.
Will do.
Language is really important. The way we talk about these things, it's important. It's important to people who are disabled. It's important to the perception on disability and how we interact with disabled people. And so I think it's really important for us to have this conversation. So I'm going to go ahead and close vote.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, it looks like it has stabilized.
So I'm going to close voting, and I'm going to show the correct answer. And it really does vary. What do we have in terms of results, Kristie?
So it's 68% said varies from situation to situation, and 32% said person first language.
Excellent. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so I'm going to get us back to our presentation. Thank y'all for engaging in that. We have a couple more of those throughout the presentation. And we'll talk about language. Let me get back over to our presentation. Here we go. So talking about disabilities, this is really important. I said that language is important because perception and how we interact with one another is really driven by the language that we use. And we talk about this idea of people or person first versus identity first. And I didn't mean that question as a gotcha. The reality is there's not really a right answer to that. It does vary situationally. You know, I very intentionally, as a disabled person, I'm totally blind and use identity first language because my blindness, my disability is a very big piece of who I am. I cannot be separated from my blindness, and it really does, and in a lot of very healthy and positive ways, impact the way I live my life. Person first language is also a really valuable way of framing disability too, because it does center the personhood before one's disability. That's a very personal decision. Folks ask, which one should I use? Well, I think that for a long time, person first has been default. And my word of advice is usually listen carefully how folks refer to themselves. That's always a good tip. And person first is not a bad fallback. I think culturally, socially, we're seeing more of this identity first language, valuing disability as an aspect of identity and diversity. But that certainly isn't where everyone is, and person first tends to be a good fallback. Kristie, anything you'd add to that?
Just thinking about, so we did this presentation in person a few weeks ago, and we had the question that some of you may have, which is, what is person first language and what is identity language? So can you give maybe an example of each of those, Justin?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm for my particular disability, maybe saying someone who is visually impaired, a person who is visually impaired, a student who is visually impaired. That would be your example of person first versus a blind student, right? So we're kind of front loading with this identity first language, the disability front and center as part of that identity. And that tends to be how I explain it.
Yeah, great. Thank you. And you might think about it from the perspective, one of the things that I've heard before is using identity language sometimes sounds weird to people if they've really learned about the person first language. But it is really embracing that disability. There's nothing wrong with having a disability, and that embracing that and understanding that can be celebrated. So just like we usually wouldn't say a person who is Black, we would say a Black person if for some reason we were using that terminology. Same thing with, instead of saying Justin is a person who is blind, we would say a blind person. So it really is part of this whole idea of celebrating and disability pride and embracing that terminology.
For sure. And disability is one piece of someone's identity, right? It is one piece of a bigger puzzle. And so I think a lot of times, and I can say this as someone with a pretty visible disability, um, folks have a hard time seeing past my blindness. But the reality is I bring a lot more to the table than that one specific piece of my identity. So I think we have to be really conscious of when we're interacting with people, especially if we know that their disability, it's something visible, or we just have a level of awareness about it. How are we situating that as a piece of their identity rather than seeing it as their entire identity? One good rule of thumb in interacting with disabled people is just treating them like human beings, treating them like you would want to be treated yourself. And I think sometimes, and this comes to the last point with attitudinal barriers, I think sometimes we're concerned about saying or doing the wrong thing, and so we may interact in ways that we typically wouldn't want to be interacted with ourselves. And so just remembering that humanity, really, really important piece of interacting with anybody. Attitudinal barriers are kind of one of my favorite things to talk about. I have a couple of them listed here, but stereotypes, sort of generalizing people. We do that because it makes it easier for us to understand the world around us. But generalizations don't they don't really consider the variability in who people are. Pity, um, to be honest with you, disabled people need access. They don't need pity. We don't need to feel sorry for someone's situation. We really need to be a good partner and collaborator and facilitator of access. Hero worship. Sometimes you'll see this through the media, through social media, where we tell these stories about disabled people and sort of like herald those trivial, small, mundane things that they may do. And what happens as a result of that is we're sharing that story because we want that sort of dopamine hit, that inspirational sort of bit from the story. But it also comes from a place that maybe we have lowered expectations of disabled people. And so we think that those small things are even bigger things. Um, and then inferiority, really, again, looking at disabled people only through the lens of disability, seeing them as less than. And fear is a really big one. I think it's a harder one for us to tackle. And I'm guilty of all of these myself. Fear is tricky because we don't want to say or do the wrong thing. But if we're afraid of having conversations and engaging people who are different from us, especially disabled people, then we miss out on an opportunity to collaborate and communicate together. And that's really important. And that's what Access is driven on. So I'm a really big proponent of alliteration because my memory is terrible. In fact, I'm probably going to look at my notes to make sure I get the order of these correct. But when we're thinking about a framework of accessibility, we want to think about 5 Ps. When we're putting events together, we're putting resources together. There's a process, set of steps that you go through, a process that you go through when you're putting these things together. And you want to do the same thing with your accessibility. And these are sort of the 5 phases that I think are critical. Planning, or sort of plan, promote, prepare, present, and progress. And we're going to talk about each of those 5 steps and what you're going to do with accessibility through each. But I want you to keep those 5 steps top of mind. 5 Ps: plan, promote, prepare, present, and progress. Plan is our first step, and I am going to hand it to you, Kristie.
Perfect. So I want you to go back to what we started with, was thinking about the event or whatever it is that you thought about, event, marketing, the promotional materials, in general, kind of, that may be a bit of a stretch, but really about the venue. So think about how you're going to be promoting this. The questions I'm going to ask you are a little bit more about physical space, but maybe think about the fact, in this case, we're doing something over Zoom, and how could your venue impact what you're planning to do. And I am going to ask you to unmute or put in the chat if you have an idea that you want to share when you think through these questions. So some of the questions we thought about in looking at the venue that you're choosing are there ramps, elevators, accessible restrooms near the event location? Can you see video displays from every seat in the room? So are you going to have people turned around backwards in some way? How would that impact someone? Maybe if they're using a wheelchair and they might end up with their back to a screen. Is there ample space between aisles or rows and clear pathways throughout the room? I know sometimes we end up in a space that's maybe smaller than we thought it was going to be, or sometimes they set up rooms like conference rooms. I will give student services building where our office is. We have some conference rooms where the tables really are not spaced out very far. You can move them, so that's nice, but they're really not spaced out very well for people who might be in a wheelchair or have other physical accessibility needs. Is there preferential seating available for attendees with interpreters? So if someone is using a sign language interpreter, are they going to be able to see the person well from a seat, just like everybody else would be seated? Have you provided details on accessible parking or entrances? So buildings should have an accessible entrance, but if it's not near your venue or if it's not near the parking, have you given that information ahead of time to the people who are coming so that they know how to get to the space that you're using? And then do you need to add additional signage so that attendees can easily find the event location? So I was in a meeting the other day on another campus, and it was a little bit hard to find the location where we were going. It was actually really hard to find. And I was trying to call people. It was really a challenge for me as a non-disabled person. The next meeting of that same group, they actually put signs up on the way into campus that just said the name of the group and had arrows. It was all the difference in the world for me to get there. Again, non-disabled. But what if I was someone who actually had an accessibility need and had to go up and down some hills and around a corner, and then, or if I couldn't see and I was relying on somebody else to lead me, that would just be an extra challenge that shouldn't be there. So have you thought about some additional signage to make it easier for everyone to be able to access?
Well, I like that. I like that example too, Kristie, because signage. We can think about it from those physical accessibility, or the visible disabilities, but even those with like mental health or where cognitive overwhelm is just really real for them. Having that certainty that they know which way they're going, we want people to show up and be present. And if they're overwhelmed before they even get there, like your event is already now a barrier to them.
Yeah, great point. And the other point that I thought you were going to, but I like your point too, was even if you don't have a disability, what a difference it makes.
Yeah.
And so by providing accessibility in this case, and in a lot of cases, you're actually making it easier for a lot of people. So not just a disabled person.
Yeah, for
So
sure.
does anyone have anything they want to share about the event or whatever it is that they're planning that would make sense with this? Especially maybe if I saw there were a few different tailgates that were mentioned, some other events, kind of hard to go back in the chat, but some other events that are happening that maybe would make sense. The Suicide Awareness Month kickoff event. Any thoughts about these, how these might impact those events, so the venue itself? Oh, Amanda has you can unmute, Amanda.
Perfect, thank you. I have a question about being able to, what's the best way to kind of engage your guests that are coming to your event to let them know about, and this might be jumping ahead, but the accessible parking and entrances. For some of our events, we have a demographic of people who generally need accessible parking that is close to an entrance. And so is it best to let them like opt into something and we reserve parking for them, or we just say this is available? What is a standard or best practice for that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I think one point to it would just be making sure that they know that the accessible parking is available and where it is. So however you're communicating to the people, so if you're sending an email or if you've got a flyer or you have some sort of listserv, making sure that you put in that announcement about the event, accessible parking will be located in lot 25, maybe a map that shows where that is if it's kind of harder to find, or there could be a link to the map, or maybe if you need more, you need to provide more information about the accessible parking. If you have a website where you're providing information, making sure that you have a link to the website there on the information that you're sending out so that they can just go to the website, and then you can provide a little bit more expansive detail if needed.
I love that thought of the website too. And it's all going to vary from like the size and the scope of the event and how comprehensive your overall communication is. But I attended a conference one time that just had an accessibility guide, and it was pretty much anything that you would need to know in terms of accessibility for that event in one location. And I knew people who had non-apparent disabilities who talked about that being very helpful. And honestly, just having more information is not a bad thing for anyone. So I really like that idea.
Great.
That's a great question.
Yeah, Ashley, do you want to unmute?
Sure. So can y'all hear me?
Hmm.
Okay, perfect. Just wanted to double check that. This may get brought up at a later time, so feel free to shut me down if it will be. But I have a question regarding when you are taking RSVPs or you're planning that event, should it be a routine that asks the question, do you have any accessibility needs? Or for someone, for instance, who needs an interpreter, where is the responsibility on the event host to provide that interpreter and to ensure there's an interpreter there, or is it on the attendee to bring an interpreter?
I think, Ashley, you kind of cut in and out a little bit, but I think we're going to answer your questions later about, right, Justin, about
Yeah.
kind of
Yes.
asking people to identify if they have a need for accommodation. I think that captures maybe.
All right, perfect.
Interpreters. Okay, we'll get there. Thank you. Y'all are great.
And don't worry about asking questions, and it may jump ahead and we'll let you know. But I love the questions. Kristie and I were talking, if we could answer questions for 2 hours, that would probably be our style. But yeah, there's a lot in here to kind of talk about different ways you can get some of that throughout the process of the event.
I think we're ready to go on to you, Justin.
Let's do it. So making accessibility a priority. So what we give attention to, we get more of. When we make accessibility a priority in how we plan our event and we communicate with people that are involved in our event, that prioritizes that with the people who are responsible for planning and putting things together. And so when I think about prioritizing accessibility, I think about communicating my expectations about accessibility with anybody that's going to be involved with that event, especially with larger scale events where you've got vendors or outside speakers. We want to be communicating about our accessibility expectations right off the bat, because that sets the tone, that sets the stage to make sure that it is front and center for them as they plan what they're doing. Develop an accessibility policy and checklist. So we'll talk in a minute more about some specific accessibility policies or verbiage, maybe a starting point or a jumping off point for you all. But having a policy that says, listen, this is not a negotiable, this is not a nice to have, this is something that we value, and it is a requirement as we plan this event and put things together. And then just having checklists spelling out what does accessibility mean, because I don't know about you, but when I hear that word, I think it tends to mean different things to different people. I'm not a real big checklist fan because I feel like folks sort of limit themselves to what's on the checklist. And if it's not there, then that's not accessibility. Or if I don't do all these things, like I'm a bad person. Like checklists can be problematic. But I think you need to have some itemization. You need to have a record of like what is accessible to us, what is accessibility to us. And then plan appropriate time to verify accessibility. It's not enough to say that it's important. We've got to check and make sure that the work has actually been done. So in your planning phase, give yourself plenty of time to go back and check PowerPoints, videos that may not be captioned, right? You want to have ample time to do that. And then I said this point already, but what we give attention to is what we get more of, or what it demonstrates our value. And that's really it for the planning phase. Promotion is kind of where we all start to see the visible pieces of our event come together because we're getting it out in the world. So, Kristie, this is you.
Yeah, thanks. So I think this is getting to some of the things that you guys were asking a few minutes ago. But definitely, promoting the event obviously is important. I mean, we know that if people are not seeing that they are welcome to come to the event, or when the event is, or there's things that are missing, we miss out on students or others coming to our events. So the first thing that I think is really helpful is setting the expectations for the event. So if someone who is potentially coming to the event, so I want to open it up a little, it doesn't have to be a student. Some of you may be working with some donors or former students or things like that. But if someone who's coming to the event doesn't see that their needs are going to be met during the event, they may choose not to come. Even if you didn't intentionally leave out something for them, you're really gonna have a very accessible event. If you're not communicating that well, then they may think, I'm not even gonna try because I don't know that they're gonna have what I need. So setting expectations is really helpful with that. So as much as possible, providing an anticipated schedule of events. So if you are doing an event, so I'm thinking of Megan right now, because Megan has an advisory board that she works with for her center, and I'm on it. So I was just thinking about that because we have a meeting coming up in a couple months. So she will send out an agenda that says beforehand, this is what time we start. Breakfast will be provided. That's this time. Then we'll have a break. Then we're going to have session 1. This is what's going to be in session 1. And then we're going to do this. That schedule of events, as much as possible, really helps someone to know how they're going to meet their needs. So maybe I have a dietary need, and if she's provided, we're going to have a light breakfast of croissants or continental breakfast, which most people know hopefully is Danishes, and I know I can't eat that. Then I know I need to eat before I come. Knowing that lunch is going to be at this time and it's going to be from Blue Baker. Okay, well, I know if I'm diabetic that I may need to eat something different, or I may need to bring a snack because I can't wait till whatever that time is in order to eat. And so really providing those parameters is really helpful. The other thing that is my pet peeve is when you don't put an ending time on an event. So I am a little bit type A, and my Outlook calendar is how I live through my day. So if I sign up to come to something and it says 3 p.m., I have no idea how much time to block off on my calendar. And I see it more often than you would think. And so I'm sometimes trying to contact people saying, is this an hour? Is it 2 hours? Is it an hour and a half? So putting that ending time is really helpful. And then what types of activities will you be doing? So if it is something that's more of an open call, it's going to be an event for students. What will be involved in that? Will you be moving around, doing some icebreakers? Will you be interacting with other people? So thinking about, Justin was, helping us think it's beyond a disability that you can see. So remember, most disabilities are invisible. Am I going to have to talk with other people? Okay, so we want to make sure that you're letting people know that, so they know whether to choose to come or not, or like, what do I need to do to prepare for that event? So I can go, but I need to kind of mentally be in the right space to know that I'm going to participate. And I'll give an example. I always tell on myself, so I'm going to tell on myself about this one. I have been in Zoom presentations before where I'm going along, I'm listening, I'm got it going, and then they say, now we're going to go into breakout rooms. Mm-hmm. And you know what? Sometimes I've been like, no, I'm not. And I'm like, done. And I leave the meeting because I just wasn't in that space to go into a breakout room and talk with people. That's not what I thought was going to happen. I thought I was going to be listening, taking some notes, probably doing something else at the same time, which I know some of you may be doing. It's okay. We all do it. But I didn't have that expectation because they didn't set it up that way. So if I know that, I can be ready and participate ahead of time. And then
can I say,
oh yeah, go Justin.
I love that you just said that, because I thought I was literally the only human being that bails on meetings when they unexpectedly do the breakout rooms.
Yeah.
It makes me so uncomfortable at times. And I think it's For me, the way I explain it, it's so interesting to sit at a table, a round table, versus like have everybody's face on the screen. It's just a totally different experience.
Yeah. And you know, and I will bring the disability part back into this. So
Yeah.
thinking about for Justin being at a round table when they say you're going to break out into groups, that's a very different experience for him than it is to say now we're going to break out into breakout rooms and you're not really going to be able to see the person versus, you know, usually you go into a breakout room, most of us turn our cameras on and we
Mhm.
have a more intimate interaction. We can't do that.
Mhm.
It really can be very uncomfortable. And again, for a
Well,
lot of us, it's uncomfortable because I don't really like doing it either. But
and
I'll
it's
do it if I know
also
ahead of time. Go ahead,
well,
Justin.
and it also it's interesting too from like somebody who uses assistive technology. Getting into a breakout room can sometimes be a cumbersome experience. Like Zoom will sometimes do a really great job of putting you on that button that says join breakout room. And sometimes like now I have to like do some keyboard ninjery like to get to the button. And that's really stressful because now that room is like waiting on me to get there. And I have been in the main room and the main presenter's like, are you gonna go to your breakout room? And I'm like, I'm trying.
Yeah, no, great point. Yeah, and Elizabeth shared, you know, the anxiety can be
Yeah,
really real, especially when you're going
very
into
real.
a breakout room. Again, it's not that you can't do that. Feel free if that's what works for what you're doing, you can do
Yeah,
breakout rooms. Just let people know ahead of time because
absolutely.
otherwise you may have people like me and Justin that just bail. Um, Okay, and then the last one was just making sure that letting participants know how to prepare ahead of time. So Justin sent an email out yesterday letting you all know, you know, we're happy you're going to be here. He has already set up a Google Drive with some information and then saying, think about an event or what you want to get out of this session so that way we can help gear it for you. Yeah, and Josette, I love Josette said, this is helpful and encouraging. So Justin's turned off his chat, so I'm going to share with him and rewiring how to plan presentations and advising sessions. And there are a series of small adjustments. I love that. Small adjustments that you can make to be more inclusive. That's great.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, we kind of talked earlier. Ashley had prompted this, and it was a great segue in kind of getting us thinking about what should we ask, right? How should we collect some of that information? How should we make ourselves available and take some of those requests? Um, we need to be providing an opportunity for folks to let their needs be known, right? And the most logical way of doing that, I think, is twofold. It's us putting ourselves out there and showing that we're committed to accessibility. But I also think at registration and in promotion, we should be letting folks know that we want to hear those requests. Um, so ask about accommodations during registration. It could be something as simple as what accommodations would you need to make this event the most accessible experience possible? Do you require any accommodations? And those are completely legitimate questions to ask. Um, in the situation where maybe you don't have as much control over your registration, you could also put in your promotional materials for any accommodations requests. Connect with such and such email address or phone number. Um, a lot of times when it comes to determining what accommodation someone might need, they've got to know the scope of what's being accommodated, right? What is the experience? And so going back to some of the things that Kristie mentioned and why that's important here is that disabled people are the experts on what their experiences and their needs are, but I'm not going to be able to tell you my needs if I don't know what's going to be expected of me when I get there, right? So being very clear on what's happening to the best of your ability, because then a lot of times those requests that a disabled person might make are going to be a bit more specific. Assign an accessibility point person, making sure that someone is fielding those requests. It helps to have a person because they're going to be pretty entrenched in those conversations. It's nice to connect with somebody. I went to a conference a couple years ago that was not an accessibility, not a disability conference at all. And they had one person that was coordinating all of the logistics for accessibility. And it was really nice to meet Chris and know that I had somebody on the other end that understood the event and could communicate with me well to figure out what my needs were. have a plan for last minute requests. Disabled people, like anybody, they have the ability to make last minute plans. Some requests can be require a little bit more time and be a little bit more difficult to navigate last minute, but we need to plan as if someone might make that request last minute. And how are we going to deal with those? How are we going to respond to them, right? So have a plan for those last minute requests. Who are they going to go through? What are some things that we just need to have built in? Accessible documents and accessible PowerPoints, we just need to do those things, right? But if something pops up last minute about a space need or captioning or something of that nature, we need to know how we're going to handle those. And then I said this already, but disabled people are experts on their experience and their needs. And so really trust that expertise. I think it's good to ask, so offer more information and ask if there's anything specifically someone might need given this activity, right? Good communication goes a long way in these situations.
Okay, Justin, I'm going to interrupt with a question real quick. So Loretta wanted to know is if people get offended by calling them disabled.
Well, yeah, there probably are people who get offended about being called disabled. I think for me, I think that language is a tricky thing. For me, if you are wanting to approach someone, and Kristie, I'd love for your feedback on this too. If you're going to approach someone, maybe you perceive that there's a barrier or that there might be an access need, I think it is reasonable, appropriate, and just such a great idea to connect with that person. And you can keep it, if you don't know how they're going to respond to it, you could always be very casual about it, polite. I've had people approach me and say, how are you? Are you enjoying yourself? Is there anything that you need? Do you have any questions? Is there something I can be helpful with? Again, we're approaching it from a place of humanity rather than disability. And then at that point, that allows me to disclose whether I want to mention an access barrier. Yes, I'm worried that I'm facing the wrong way in this room. Which way is the stage, right? And I've done that before. But if I don't want to disclose my disability, maybe it's something that's non-apparent. That gives me the freedom and the flexibility and the autonomy to decide whether I'm going to engage in that or not.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I think, it's a complex issue for sure. When it comes to language and using the word, the people first language or, identity first. And I would say we in our national organization has decided to use the word disabled. So we say disabled students. We don't say students with disabilities. For us in disability resources here on our campus, we use both. So sometimes we say students with disabilities, sometimes we say disabled students because we recognize that we have students that identify both ways. So they get to choose what terms they use and rather than us choosing for them. And so I think it's also an interesting conversation because you kind of have to think about when are you going to use that word? So are you going to go up to Justin and say, are you disabled? I mean, that would probably be offensive, even though he's okay with the word disabled.
Yeah.
So, it's not really very common that you're going to use the word to the person and really about the person, probably not, because why are we talking about that unless, we're in our office and we're deciding on accommodations. So I think Justin's approach of you're more likely to say, do you need any kind of accommodations? Which may mean that if you see Justin and you do say, do you need any accommodations? Then you are assuming he's disabled. That might be offensive to some people, but really it's saying, I care about you. I want to know, do you need an accommodation? And that is kind of a technical term that really means I'm going to do something in order to make sure you have access, which is a good thing. So I think, when you start talking about the terminology, how are you using it and when are you going to use it is also important.
Well, and two other things, like I certainly don't want us to be afraid of the word. Like it's not a bad word. It's not taboo. The more comfortable we are with the idea of disability, the more comfortable the general discourse on disability will be. But the other thing that I get nervous about is if our fear of the word or the idea prevents us from engaging people, then those barriers are just going to exist, right? And so we genuinely do have to find ways to have conversation. Um, I think just keeping that humanity front and center, that really does help make those conversations a little easier.
So we are providing a sample accessibility statement. This was adapted from Rutgers and their accessible events website. And so it's a little bit longer, but I think for maybe more so for like if you did have a website with information, this would be really appropriate to have there about an event or something that you're doing. So it says, Texas A&M University strives for campus experiences to be universally designed and usable by all people to the extent possible. If you require an accommodation to participate in this event, please contact the event organizer, and then you put the sponsoring department contact's name there, and then you give either a phone number or email information or both by a specific date. So it's okay to go ahead and put a date in there that you need to get that information by. And we're suggesting at least 5 days in advance. For something like a sign language interpreter, that may be the lead time that you need to do that. And then if you need an accommodation for this event, please provide the name of the event, the date, and the accommodation required in your correspondence to the event organizer. So in the situation where maybe somebody's putting on a lot of events, making sure that you're specific about what you're going to need and for what event.
Yeah.
And yes, you could place it at the end of a registration form. Actually, that would be a great idea to put something like that there. Again, this one's a little long. We really like it because it talks about that the university is committed to providing an accessible experience. That may not need to be there, but again, we kind of like to put forth that that is what we're striving for. But yes, putting that on a registration event or registration form would be great.
Absolutely. So social media accessibility, when you're thinking about promoting your event, so we use a lot of social media. And so we'll talk about a couple of like really practical ways to do that. Also in the resources, I think it's in the, yeah, it is in the resources that I shared in the Google Drive. You have some practices specific to different social media sites. So adding alternative text, adding descriptions that are going to describe images, lot of visuals on social media, and so each platform is going to have different ways that you can describe images, and so you want to refer to some of those guidelines. But if I were to encounter an image, we'll talk about this in a minute, that isn't thought of with accessibility, it's just going to tell me it's an image, and you use that image for a reason, and that's what we should be communicating. Open versus closed captions. So just making sure that videos are captioned in some way. Different social media platforms are going to have different ways of doing that. Some allow for closed captions, which are the kind of captions that you can turn off and on, versus open captions, which are just sort of built into the video. Audio or written description of all visual content. So when you've got a video, especially videos that don't really have any dialogue, it's just a lot of action. If I were to bring that video up on YouTube or Facebook, I'm not going to have any idea what's going on there. And so having some sort of written transcript of why or what's happening in that video is helpful. Avoid ASCII art. So I don't know if you've seen those where they have like the font sort of styled characters that you can use that are ASCII or emojis. Those just get read aloud as a bunch of gibberish. I don't see that as much anymore, but there was a period for like 2 or 3 years where you would see that everywhere. They would just replace letters of words with emoji letters, and they would just get read out as garbage. So just being conscious that we're using actual text. And then camel case for hashtags. So camel case, there's different ways that you can use capitalization. Camel case is where you capitalize the first letter of every word. If you were to make every letter lowercase in a hashtag, a piece of assistive technology is just going to try to treat that as one word. Whereas if you capitalize the letter, the first letter of every word that's sort of smushed together in that hashtag, it treats it as separate words. So that's just helpful to know. And then use text on images very sparingly. So if we're trying to put a lot of text on an image that we use on social media, we should probably just put that in the post content itself. The other thing is even if we put just a little bit of text, there could be contrast issues, right? So it could be someone who is colorblind, someone who is low vision, and now you sort of got this competing text with the image. And again, we want to use that very sparingly. It's not saying don't do any of these things. It's saying make sure that you do them sparingly and appropriately.
Justin, I love that Ashley shared that she already does that, but all of those things, but she didn't know it helped with accessibility. And I think it goes
Right.
back to some of those things that help, when you were talking about the hashtags, I can't read them if you don't do the capitalization on the words. So, it's one of those things with the capitalization. That's what she said she does. So again, it's one of those things that really helps for accessibility. But for those of us that don't need it, then that's good. So she said she wasn't doing all the things, but she's going to implement them now. But she was doing the capitals.
Yeah. It's super interesting because like I know I'm usually pretty good at like sleuthing out what the hashtag is in all lowercase, but if I have to do mental gymnastics to figure out what you're using, I'm just gonna skip over it. So I think we probably all do it. Okay, so I am going to open our next quick poll. Again, menti.com. I've got the code here 11450902. I am going to switch over. How am I doing as a DJ video producer here? Is it good?
You're doing good.
Sweet. So we have our next question. And what is the textual description that is given to provide screen readers details on images? What is that called? We've got a couple of options here. Image description, caption, alternative text description, or alternative text. And you just tell me when it kind of flattens out.
Will do. I think the last one was percentages. This one's numbers. So it's throwing me off a little.
I don't know why I did that. I could probably fix it, but
It's all right. I think it is probably done. Oh, now we got percentages. You fixed it.
Okay, so I'm curious. I'm going to close voting. I'm curious. I don't want to show the answer. What did we have here?
So 67% said alternative text, 17% said caption, 13% said image description, and 4% said alternative description.
So it is alternative text. It's interesting. So why is it called alternative text? I've always found that term really clunky. I typically in conversation say image descriptions or alt text. Alt in HTML is an attribute that in the code is where you would put your description. So alt text, alternative text, is the descriptive part of the image. Let me get back over to our presentation, and we'll tell you a little bit more about what alt text is. So alternative text, also called alternative text descriptions, not bad as a secondary guess. It's going to be those image descriptions. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit here in just a minute, or we'll show you some examples of some alt text. We'll talk about how you actually put it together. It's not an image caption. Okay, so an image caption is typically something that you see in like print media where a description of the image is below it. Sometimes alt text might mirror that caption, in which case you just wouldn't have alt text, you'd refer to the caption. But all that to say, they often serve different purposes. A caption might identify people, whereas alt text is sort of telling you what is the visual context? Why are you using the image? What's happening in that image? A lot of times with captions, we don't share a lot of details because people can see the image. With alt text, that is specifically seen by people who cannot use the image, right? It's like assistive technology that will use it. So we tend to be a bit more descriptive in alt text. It is typically less than 150 characters. This is sort of, it's debatable. It's really interesting to me because I tend to shoot for 120 to 150. But you've got social media platforms like Twitter that give you 1,000 characters. Please do not use 1,000 characters because my screen reader then has to read all 1,000 of those characters. And probably by about 200, I'm out. So just because you can doesn't mean you should. And truthfully, you could plug as much text as you wanted into an alt text attribute and it would just keep reading. Just shoot for that 150 because that usually is about a sentence and a half, a sentence or two. And so that's enough description typically. Describes general observations. Usually with alt text, we want to drill down. We want to start at what's the biggest, most obvious, most important piece of that image. And as we have space, and as it is important, let's drill down into specific details. And so that tends to be how you approach alt text. And they can be, you can include specific details. A lot of times when I'm working with folks, one really cool thing I've gotten to do is work on websites for like sports teams. And I really like alt text for those because action is really fun to describe. And so you can be descriptive, just you don't have to like, this is not feature writing. You're not trying to, get some literary award for your alt text. Give as much description as necessary and no more than that. So, Kristie, I think you're going to lead. We've got a couple of pictures that we're going to show.
So we're going to have you practice. So this is your interactive part again. And I think it's going to be easiest for you to do this in the chat. So what we want you to do is to go into the chat, and I'm gonna read all of them as we go, and practice your alt text skills. So we have the picture that we're showing. Justin knows what's on the picture because he helped develop this presentation. So I don't have to describe it for him because then I might be telling you what to write in your alt text. But if you will just go into the chat and just make an attempt, what would you put if you were doing alt text for this picture that is on the screen? And I'm going to give you a minute. It takes a little bit of time to think about that. We need some Jeopardy music or something going on, Justin. We should have thought of that. Okay, so I gotta get the chat. Students outside playing a Jenga style game at a booth. Students at a tabling event playing Jenga. A group of students playing a game of giant Jenga. Student at Texas A&M play Jenga game. Students playing giant Jenga game outside on TMU campus. What else? Oh, here we go. Students standing outside on a sunny day on campus. The two students nearest the camera are playing a game of Jenga, and the student further back is reaching out to move a wooden block while smiling. I thought about it, Justin. I was curious to know if you wanted to share what your alt text actually says.
I will. Are we ready? I'll tell you.
I think we're ready.
Okay. Sorry, this is I may read this in chunks. Hold on just a second. A man carefully removes a Jenga block from a okay. A man carefully removes a Jenga block from a life-size or a giant-sized Jenga tower. People watch as the man carefully. Oh, people watch smiling. I'm sorry. Let me read that one more time. That was really disjointed. A man carefully removes a Jenga block from the life-size Jenga tower. A crowd watches smiling.
Okay. So did your wife write that description or did you get that from?
No, she did. She did. So it's really funny because, and I'm glad that you asked that. If I were to plug this in, just upload this image into my PowerPoint slides, Microsoft PowerPoint would actually probably try to describe it. I don't know what the automated image description was. But it probably wouldn't be as good as that. I like how, so there's a lot that I enjoy about this image. Number one, like she conveyed a lot of the emotion, why the image was something that caught her interest. You talk about this man carefully. removing the block. I mean, would you say, you're looking at the image, would you say you could tell that he's kind of being cautious about it or careful about it?
Yeah, he's got both hands up on the sides of it, so he does look like he's trying to be real careful.
Yeah, and then she included the details about the people watching around him or smiling around him. I think that it's really cool, and it was really pithy, right? It wasn't all that long.
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. I think the ones that you guys wrote are really great. It's interesting
Yeah.
to see the different things that you pull out.
Yeah.
And I will share that. So I have several, because of what I do, I have several friends that are my social media friends who are blind. And so I do alt text for all of my own personal pictures. I also think it's good for me to practice. But it doesn't take long, but I do really thoughtfully think about the pictures. And I know there's a few people here that are my social media friends, so they know I share pictures of my grandson all the time. And so I do think about, Justin and I have talked about, like, I will put something about how he's smiling in the picture or something, because I want Justin to really know the feeling that's coming from that. So, you know, was it when he was feeling sick and he's got that look on his face, or does he have like a giant smile because he's laughing, or is it just a little soft smile? Because I want him to have that same experience of looking at the picture as someone who has sight. So that's kind of what I keep in mind. Not that I'm perfect at all, but that's kind of my thought process when I'm doing the alt text, is I'm just trying to think of, what is everyone else getting out of this picture, and how do I make sure that I'm conveying that?
For sure.
So
We do have another one if we want to do it.
Yeah, so let's do this one and just see how you would describe this one. So everybody take a minute or two and try it out. Okay, and while they're doing that, we have a good question, Justin, about how do we acknowledge race and ethnic diversity in images? So we'll answer that in a minute. Y'all try to write some things and then we'll answer that.
You want to answer it now?
Sure, y'all listen and write something too.
I thought you said wait a minute, so I'll wait. I'll wait.
Okay, y'all had some good ones last time. It's a little harder, I think, to do this one. Justin, you might have stumped him with this picture.
That's Angela's fault.
Why
I can tell you what she wrote.
don't you do that and then we'll answer the question.
Yeah.
I think maybe it's a little bit harder.
Yeah, for sure. So this says, cadet running with reveille in front of a crowd with fog. I actually don't, we didn't even, to be honest with you, Kristie, I think she dropped this image in there out of a couple that she had pulled, and I don't even think we talked about it, so I don't even know what this is.
Okay, well, let me tell you, we got some, so I just need to wait another few seconds. So here's the ones that we have. Reveille and her handler run out in front of the Yell Leaders and Aggie football team in front of a crowded stadium at a Texas A&M game.
Yep.
Reveille and her handler run out on the football field with smoke and fans in the background.
Yep.
A Texas A&M Corps of Cadet member runs with Reveille, a collie, onto the football field in front of packed stands with Yell Leaders and sideline observers nearby. A TMU mascot and her handler spread out onto the field at a football game with the Yell Leaders close behind. A huge crowd of fans cheer them on. At an Aggie home football game, Reveille and her Corps member are racing out on the field with smoke in the background with a stadium full of people. Corps student running. Oh, got a few more. Corps student running with Reveille with Yell Leaders following. Cannon just fired. Opening of a football game at A&M.
Yeah.
Okay, y'all are doing good.
These are awesome.
Yeah, I will say one thing, Justin, just that I think is interesting about this one, even more so than the other one, is some of the knowledge that we assume it or do we not? So this week I was doing a presentation with some other people, and there were some images, and I was trying to do the alt text for somebody else's image and trying to figure out what was in the image or what the purpose was. It was a screenshot, and I didn't know if it was a screenshot of a website or so. Kind of some of the thought behind it for me with that situation was, what's the purpose of this? What is this? I,
Mhm.
as someone coming in to do alt text for somebody else, it was a real challenge. So I think that plays a little bit into this picture, but also trying to decide how much A&M information are we assuming people have or not? And I don't know, I guess that's a question for
Yeah.
you, Justin.
So we got a couple of really good questions about alt text. I mean, I was thinking of two things that come to mind with alt text. Purpose, so what was the purpose of the image, and the place where the image is going to be used, right? So here I might use Reveille, right? Because we're all affiliated with A&M, we know who Reveille is. Um, but would it be more appropriate if this were going to go to a general audience who'd be less familiar to describe Reveille as a collie, right? Um, and so like, and maybe even some of the coloring information. um yeah, it's interesting because as you were talking, I had this thought. I get really frustrated. There are a lot of, I'm processing out loud, but I hope this is helpful. There are a lot of accessibility professionals in some of the technical accessibility groups that I'm in that want alt text to be purely informational. um, Few words, no more than a sentence, just the bare bones, the bare facts. We don't use images necessarily just to convey information. We also convey emotion as well, right? Um, and so, what I like about this picture, and especially the last one, we really got to that like that energy, that emotion of why the image was important. And y'all, I don't want you to be afraid of that. I think that as someone who is not sighted, but who has had sight before, I remember that feeling when you have this really like powerful visual, and we use visuals for a specific reason, and we should encapsulate as much of that as we possibly can in our alt text descriptions. Um, and so, yeah, they tend to want to wash away some of those emotional things. And I think as we have space, like we don't want to write a novel, but again, why are we using it? Is there an emotion that you were trying to invoke? Well, let's make sure that we do that with our alt text, right? Um, Going back to the race and gender and ethnicity and all of that, this is a tricky question with a tricky answer, because I think if you were to ask, a group of 10 different blind and visually impaired people who are pretty much going to be the ones using the alt text, a lot of them are going to give you different responses. I have found anecdotally that that tends to be those who have had eyesight before and who have not. I know what some of those terms mean and maybe some of the visual characteristics that we sort of assume accompany each of those. And so I have found when that's included, it to be helpful. But um, is it genuinely important? Is it necessary to to the information that the image is trying to convey? Do we have to have that information? I think in most instances it is not genuinely important to understanding of the image. Um, I would say if you want to include it, or you think it is important to the image or to the person viewing the image, I would consult with the person depicted in the image and make sure that you are clear from them the types of attributes they want to describe. Um, because I would certainly not want to ascribe attributes to somebody that they don't identify with. Um, and I think 9 times out of 10, it's probably not necessary to include. So I know that's kind of like a variable answer, but I think that just goes to show you how complex this can be. Always ask, and then always question whether it's genuinely relevant and necessary.
That's a
If
great point, Justin. I really like that. And I think that the point about, are we making assumptions when we are, if we're going to say somebody's race or ethnicity in the description, how do we know that? You know, I'm going to assign that, I think that's a really great point.
You know what's interesting is people will they'll mistakenly be like, um, I'll say something about somebody, or they'll mention somebody. Yeah, you know the one with the glasses and blonde hair. Oh wait, why am I saying that to you? You didn't know that. Well, but those are things that we describe people by the things that we see. So I don't want to dismiss that those things are important, but I also don't want to say that they're so important that they have to be included in here. And especially those things that get into identity, I don't want to assume anything. And so I think it's just tread carefully and really question whether it's genuinely necessary. That's a great question, and one I have actually really wanted to research a little bit more in depth. I did an informal survey through my website a few years ago, and found that people who have seen before want more details. People who have never had eyesight don't care. And so that's kind of interesting. So the images that we've shown before this slide, pretty standard images, things you'd see in body copy, in a header, shared through social media, things like that. But what about more complex images? Images where we're sharing a lot of data. And Kristie, I think we have an infographic here. Describe this infographic for me, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so it's from the Association of Former Students, and it is, I think, in celebration of 144 years of the association. So it has 144 years old on the top right, and it says June 26, 1879. And then it has a list of several facts. So A&M Club presidents, 277, 295 muster chairs, and on and on.
And there's so much data in this, and the reality is I question why. I mean, we have an image that we're sharing as a matter of convenience, but a lot of times we're sharing these via social media, and your images get squashed. An infographic to share this much data could be problematic for literally anybody looking at it. And so with complex data, this is one of those where you just really have to decide, A, is an image really the best way to convey that data? B, do I have a textual representation of that data somewhere else? So if this were my graphic and my data to share, I might share all of this data in a graphic that also points to a website with the same information. I might share a smaller snapshot of data and send a link to the website where the full data set is. There's so many different ways you can do that. Alt text is not for complicated data representation. You would not everything that you just said, I would not put into an alt text label. It would just be too much. So got to think about what's the intent, what are we genuinely trying to convey, and where's the textual representation of that we could point to. And if I were describing the alt text to this and then pointing to a link where the full data set would be, we have in this alt text description an infographic of highlights from 144 years of the accomplishments of the Association of Former Students at Texas A&M University. So, and then if I were sharing it on social media, I'd point to a website that had all of that data.
Justin, before we go to the next slide, do you want to share anything at all about flyers? And we've just recently, like this week, been talking about flyers and Canva, and maybe a caveat there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we get a lot of this where we use software to create things that we're going to print out or post online. Let's be honest, Microsoft Word, as good as it is, as much as we use it, it's not really meant for layout and design. And then we end up sharing those graphics with a ton of information, and literally it's just a picture. There's no text at all. It's just a picture. When I think about stuff like that, so flyers, for instance, why am I making a flyer, an image or a PDF that's going to be shared digitally and never printed anywhere? Or maybe is going to be hung up in one location, right? Do I need a flyer? Or could I just have a page on my website? Or a really simple email crafted? Or maybe a graphic that is simple and kind of invokes that emotion about whatever I'm trying to advertise on social media, and text content that supports that graphic. Flyers, I think, just in this day, I don't think that they're used as much as they used to be. That used to be sort of the standard thing that we would do. And Kristie mentions Canva. I mean, Canva in particular is tricky. Awesome tool that I think, as a content creator myself, I think anything that we can do to make content creation easier, awesome, perfect. But it doesn't have accessible output. And so we've got to be thoughtful about, why are we creating this? Where are we sharing it? And would there be a better, more accessible way to share this?
Thank you. That was not a planned part of our presentation, but we've just been talking about it. And Justin and I had a good conversation the other day about why do we make a flyer, and then we put all the same information in the email so that we make sure everybody has access, then why don't we just put it in the email and not have a flyer? So just something to think about. Flyers are kind of something we always historically did, but maybe questioning why and thinking about that.
And I would be curious, I don't have anything that supports this, but like, I mean, if you send a flyer and somebody's viewing it from their phone or whatever, now they've got to open that file and they're going to see that information is the same information that they've already read in the email. Like, that's just generally kind of annoying. And I don't think we do it to be annoying. I think we just do it because we've sort of, it's tradition, right? That's the way we've always promoted events. But maybe we should challenge some of those traditions. I hope that this presentation becomes a challenge for some of those little things.
Awesome, thanks. So dietary needs, I think, this has been something we've done a better job of overall, of really thinking about dietary needs. Lots of times when we have events planned where there's going to be food, especially if it's a meal, we do ask about dietary accommodations needed when someone registers or when they RSVP, making sure that we are considering food allergies when providing snacks. So it's not just about meals, but can you think about making sure that you've got some prepackaged food that you're thinking about the top allergens. And then knowing, like, if you have someone in your group that commonly orders food, taking note of that and making sure that you're thinking about that proactively. So we used to have someone who didn't eat gluten on my staff. And so when we were planning, it wasn't an afterthought of, oh, we could get these 5 places and then going, oh, shoot, those won't work. Because of my staff member, it was like, where can we get food that we can get a gluten-free option? So it's really thinking about that ahead of time so that person didn't have to ask all the time. And the other point I would make about this is sometimes I have seen in smaller groups. So for instance, maybe like the directors for our division, we may not ask the question anymore because it's a small group, but we get new people coming in or we have spouses, and we really should be asking that question even on maybe smaller events, just to make sure that we are considering dietary needs as something that may be important to someone.
In our Google Drive folder that we shared, I included the catering guide that the Department of Residence Life developed. Really comprehensive guide. I will tell you, I reviewed it and looked through it and thought it was really interesting. My daughter has epilepsy, and one of her treatments is a ketogenic diet, like less than 15 carbs a day. And it's important to remember that not everybody eats the same way, and people use food and nutrition in very different ways. And so I love this point about dietary needs. So, Kristie,
Yeah,
preparing. We've got the planning, we've got the promoting. Now we're actually like we're into the thick of preparing for the event.
Yeah, and we've already talked about captions some. So the open versus closed captions, it's not the same as subtitles. Kind of like how pictures with a caption, it's not the same. And they are necessary for communication access. But I also like to make the point now with social media. I mean, if a video isn't captioned and for some reason I'm watching it on my phone, most of the time I'm not gonna watch it because I'm not actually listening to my phone most of the time. And I don't know if that's a young people thing or an old people thing or what, but I'm usually in a room with other people, or I'm eating lunch at my desk, but I have the door open or something, and I want to read the captions. I don't want to watch the video. And I also get annoyed when people use automatic captions, because even as someone who could hear the video, when I'm just reading it, I get confused, because automatic captions are not the same as actual captions that were edited and made sure that they actually fit with what the words are that are being used. Captions, I'm sure you all know, are useful for everyone. I find myself as I get older relying on them more and more on the TV. We just finished Ted Lasso. If you are a fan, loved it, but I had to have the captions on. Also, give the example of, oh my goodness, I think Ted Lasso actually was the one where we just have to have it, because sometimes the British accents, I couldn't understand what they were saying. Definitely every time they said the F word, I knew what they were saying, but the other words, sometimes they would get me. So if you don't watch Ted Lasso, sorry for the reference there. But also we know that students who English is their second language, or they are a second language learner, being able to read and process visually as well as listening is really, really helpful. Or some of the auditory processing problems, being able to read the words as well as listen. So captions are not just for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. They really are for everyone. And if you're making any kind of videos, that should be part of your process. So not, oh yeah, I need to caption it. You know, I've already done it. It's done. Oh shoot, I need to caption it. It should be write your transcript, plan the video, whatever's involved in that process, caption the video. That should be part of the steps that you're doing. And when in doubt, hire out. So if it's a short video, you may be able to caption it yourself. There's a lot of different tools. The IT accessibility website for A&M has some information about that, but it's also not very expensive. Actually, people think it is, but it's not that expensive to send a video out, get it captioned, and get it back from some of those places. So I love people saying that they have their captions on with fans blowing and screaming children, no way to hear. So you definitely need the captions for videos. So great.
So should you use automatic captions? Kristie's already kind of let us know that you shouldn't. And there's a lot of examples of why you shouldn't, but this Taylor Swift video is probably a good one. I'm going to play a video here from YouTube. This is also linked in the slides, so if you want to go back to review it afterwards, you can see the whole thing. I'll play just a minute or so of it.
We sang some of Taylor Swift's most popular songs.
And let YouTube's automatic closed caption tool translate them.
These are the lyrics we got back.
Also part-time, due respects to go. I was in your science, you got me at all. You fair homie, you plan on me. You ban only the baby. An angel, any snakes to me. In Armenia, one is only. I knew you were troubled when you walked in. So machine mommy now, blue mean, defeated and never paying. Na 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 na, Cold War now. Couple, the scheme for action.
I swear teachers,
Steve cheer captain and
in a model bleachers.
period up to date when you wake up and find, well, they're elected for days has been here.
So the point is definitely made. It was interesting, the parts where the lyrics are clearer, maybe where the song gets a little bit quieter, or she's just saying a word or two at a time in the song, how the automated captions probably did a much better job of recognizing that. But automated captions, as good as AI is these days, it is not great for communication access. And that's a great example.
Caption failed. YouTube document.
So I'm going to
Screen share mute.
boom. So we talked about captions, right? That's the synchronized text from videos. Audio description is a little different. Audio description is narration that sort of weaves in the natural dialogue and audio of a video or film that provides that description about what's happening to folks who can't see it, right? So it's narration of what's happening visually. And usually it's about characters or scenery, costume, action, things like that. You really have to see it to understand it. It's wild to think, how is somebody describing it and not interrupting? Very artfully. It's very well done. And I'm going to show you an example here in just a minute. Most Netflix original series have them. A lot of major motion pictures from the big production companies have them. A lot of broadcast TV shows have them. Netflix, I like to point to Netflix because a lot of people have access to that. If you were to go to the audio options, to like if you were changing languages, English AD, which is audio description, is usually an option. And you can just see it. It doesn't change the sound of the program. It just adds a narration track. It's really very cool. Remember the first time I experienced audio description in a really powerful way was, oh gosh, it was like 2018, 2019. It was the second of the last trilogy of Star Wars. I was never a big Star Wars fan as a kid because I couldn't see them. there was just so much action. I just couldn't see the films. And so like going and seeing the newer trilogy with audio description, it got me very interested in Star Wars. And it was just really cool to go back and experience those with audio description, having seen them as a kid with really limited eyesight to now actually being able to sort of be brought into the film. It was really cool. And then I say this all to say too, that there's not broad support for audio description in a lot of video services. So even YouTube has really limited support for audio description. I've seen mixed reports. YouTube was testing a secondary language option for videos. I have seen it once or twice. I don't manage any channels that seem to have access to it, but I have also seen instructions that talk about adding a secondary language. So your mileage is totally going to vary. What I tend to recommend, if you're including audio description, you can have a separate version of your video that you just sort of lay that narration track over the top of it and then share that. I will tell you, my wife, who is fully sighted, says how much she gets out of things when she has audio description on, because it really clues her and keys her into things that are important that she's seeing. And this is kind of a good segue because my family watched the Harry Potter series all with audio description, and I wanted to share just a bit of a scene from Harry Potter with audio description. So let me get over there. Oh, shoot, you can't hear it. That's not helpful. Hold on.
Mute. Currently unmuted. Alt plus A button. Harry Potter. Harry Potter. Mute. M button. Extra Stevens and Karani. Harry Potter. Dialogue. Banner landmark clickable. Play.
There we go.
Press S to exit full screen alert.
Night. The rippling waters of Hogwarts Lake are surrounded by dark mountains. On the far side, a white marble tomb on a tiny island. A large marble block slides back, and two supports beneath it tumble away. The Dark Lord Voldemort leans down into the tomb. He gazes at the black Elder Wand in his hand and thrusts up his arm. A massive force of energy shoots from the tip of the wand, illuminating the dark sky. Dark, foreboding clouds surround a metal shield with the letters WB in its center. The shield moves forward. Warner Brothers Pictures, a Time Warner company.
So I'll stop it there. Really, I stopped there because I've never heard the WB shield described that way, and I always find it really interesting. There wasn't any dialogue there, so you didn't get to see it weave in and out, but you heard some of the sound effects. It really isn't meant to interrupt any of those things. So that's audio description. In the wild, I don't see it very often. I think it is important. It actually is, audio description is part of the web content accessibility guidelines and even some of the lower level guidelines. But it's hard and it does require some time. So I like to show people examples of that.
Yeah, I loved Justin's example of Harry Potter because I watched it a couple of years ago with my family. We were watching all the movies. And that right there, like, I was like, I don't know what's happening. You know, a lot of the movies, they're so dark and there's things moving around. And I couldn't remember who was who sometimes because there was some space in between. So it's interesting, again, how some of those things that are designed, you know, for someone who cannot see actually were benefit for me. Oh, and Miramar says the last season of Game of Thrones, not a Game of Thrones watcher, but some of those darker kind of shows, especially being able to know, or with lots of characters, really can be helpful. So we're going to talk a little bit about sign language interpreters and transcriptionists. So one question that we get that we don't even have on the slide, but that typically is a requested accommodation. So for most programming that we do, we're not going to provide a sign language interpreter or a transcriptionist unless there's a request for that. There is a cost to it. There are not a lot of ASL sign language interpreters here in town. So it's not something that's easily done. And it would be pricey for that to be provided for every event, especially if no one's using it, there's not a point. For large events like graduation, absolutely, we do have sign language interpreters and transcriptionists available. But for most of the events that you would be planning, we would suggest that you do have that way to request accommodations. And then if someone requested an interpreter or transcriptionist, then you would actually be engaging with us probably to tell you how to get an interpreter or transcriptionist for your event. We do not pay for interpreters for most of the events that are happening on campus. That would be the responsibility of the sponsoring entity. But we are happy to consult, walk you through that process, help you with all of that. Interpreters should be placed where they can easily be seen. Transcriptionists are basically like a court reporter. So for someone who does not use sign language, or maybe the material is very technical and sign language does not work as well for that, they might use a transcriptionist. So that person would be typing on a laptop, basically, or another device, and it would be shown up on a screen for the participant to be able to follow along. Don't get a lot of requests for transcriptionists at events, but it is something that could happen. Definitely, if you have material, so for this presentation, if we had an interpreter or transcriptionist, we'd want to give them the PowerPoint slides ahead of time, so that they could make sure they knew any kind of technical terms, spelling of names, some of those things, and have that available for them. If you have an interpreter in some place where it is a performance, so possibly like an Opus performance, they would have that interpreter spotlighted because it would be too dark if they're just standing on the side of the stage. So they would have them in a place that was spotlighted where people would be able to see them. In a Zoom presentation, the interpreter should pen themselves so that way they can be seen the whole time. And then you never would want complete darkness without a way to illuminate the interpreter. So say, for example, for the suicide awareness, if there's a walk associated with that, if it was actually going to be dark, if you had an interpreter, you definitely want some way, someone responsible for having a light flashing on them or shining on them or something like that. So really thinking through where you might need that. So you might not get that request until a week or so before the event, but you want to be thinking about that ahead of time. So even though you may not have a request for an interpreter or transcriptionist, knowing now that could be a request as you plan your events, just think about how would you do that if it were to be requested.
So assistive listening devices, assistive technology that supports people who do have a hearing impairment, who are hard of hearing. You have to use a microphone. It's sort of a closed system, microphone, direct. You get folks who are hard of hearing, but also folks with auditory processing difficulties. But you have to use a microphone. Many venues do have assistive listening built into them. And so whereas people used to have to carry their own assistive listening devices, students, we would check them out for a long time. Most of our buildings on campus actually have assistive listening built into them and are managed by the building. So it's a good idea to know what system might be in place for whatever venue you're working in. Again, they don't work if there's no microphone. So I'm going to say that because it's that important. Yes, you need the microphone. No, your voice is not always loud enough for everybody to hear. So definitely use a microphone. Zoom and remote attendees also they're not going to be able to hear unless you use a microphone. So there really is a need for everybody. And then I'm going to talk about accessible documents. I'm going to talk about this at a really high level because honestly, we could probably have a whole half-day session on how to make accessible documents. I linked a ton of resources in the Google Drive specific to apps that you might be building documents in. But you want to make sure that you're following accessibility best practices. And I'm going to point out a couple of those here in just a second. Share materials ahead of time. So we did that yesterday when we shared the PowerPoints. Make sure that you're sharing those accessible materials ahead of time so that folks can follow along if they need them. Consider web-based materials instead of PDFs. That's not to say that PDFs aren't great. A lot of PDFs aren't fully accessible, especially if we pull them out of applications that don't think about accessibility. So web-based materials, the web, HTML, really probably one of the most accessible platforms for content if we program it well. And so I really try to urge people, if you've got a website and you can post it on your site, that may be a better option in most instances. And they're just more flexible. You can view them on different devices. PDFs, they get really weird when you're trying to view them on smaller screens, whereas most websites have responsive design and kind of be flexible. So I told you I'd tell you about a couple of accessibility best practices. Headings is one of those. I have here a screenshot of how you would apply a heading in Microsoft Word. But my font is big and it's a different color and a different font. Well, that's not a heading. That's just larger font and a different color and a different font family, right? Headings actually are marked up to assistive technology as this is a heading, this is a subheading, and they're associated with different numbers for the level. Heading level 1 usually being reserved for the title, and then as you get into those subheads and subheads, then you start to kind of drill up 2, 3, 4, and they run through heading level 6. But when we use headings, right, we're usually subdividing our content just so for readability, but we need to make sure that we're actually marking that as a heading with styles. And whatever application you're working in, a lot of them do have them. If you're working in InDesign, right, InDesign has headings, Word has headings, Google Docs has headings. Refer to some of those guides that I put in the Google Drive to see if an app that you're interested in working with is there. And if not, Google and look for accessibility or heading styles in XYZ app. So alt text, we talked about that. Really easy to do in Microsoft products. Just right click and there's an option to view the alt text. One thing that we didn't say earlier that you can do in the alt text panel, especially in Word, well, I say in Word, in all Office products, you can always describe the image, but if it's genuinely a decorative image, meaning it doesn't really provide any value, you know, I think of like little artistic elements or icons, things like that, that really don't convey a lot of meaning. They're just there to kind of supplement the word that's next to them. A headshot could even maybe be viewed as decorative. You can flag that in Office. You can check a little box that says mark as decorative, and then you avoid putting a blank alt text, right? Because a blank alt text then just says image for someone using assistive technology. So you can do all of that in Office. Understandable link text. I like to use link text that is action oriented. So, you know, learn more information about, or review our registration, or sign up for such and such event. If you were to just put click here, or details, or info, just one word, there's no context as to what's on the other side of that link if you're just navigating by links, which, to be honest with you, assistive technology users are doing that. So making sure that your link text is descriptive. Accessible tables. So I've got my siblings here listed with some fruits. And we need to remember about tables. Tables are for data, right? Tabular data. We sometimes use tables for formatting and layout. Don't do that. You can use margins and line spacing and columns, but we don't want to use tables for layout and design because tables are for data. The most important thing about tables, especially in Office products or whatever app you're working in, make sure that your top row, which is usually like your column headers, make sure that those are actually indicated as column headers. In Word, PowerPoint, Outlook, you can actually check a little box that says use first row as header, or use column headers, and it will actually do that. Because if I'm scrolling across, I want the column header to read as those fruit labels, even if I'm down at the bottom of the table. And then Kristie, you're going to talk about your favorite feature.
Yes. So the accessibility checker, and this is in Word products, and it is awesome. So I will be totally honest that I'm not a technology person. So I used to, probably 7 or 8 years ago, I was presenting with Justin, and I kind of knew some stuff, but then I'd be like, I have Justin, so he knows these things and he does these things. And I have turned over a new leaf, and I am trying to learn, and have been for the last few years. So if you are not a technology person like me, you can learn these things, and the accessibility checker will be your best friend. So if you go to the review, whatever, I don't even know what it's called, tab, I don't know, maybe tab, Justin nodded, see? The review tab, and click on it. On the left, a few over, it says check accessibility. When you click on that, it will go through your document or your presentation, and it will check for accessibility, and it will tell you all the errors that you have, and you just click on what the error is, and it will tell you what the error is, and it'll tell you what to do. So it'll say like that it needs alt text, and you just type in the box, and then you just exit out and go on to the next error. And then I'll always, when I'm done, check accessibility again and make sure. It's not 100% foolproof. So there's things it may not catch, but it's going to catch the majority of the things that will be a problem for a screen reader. And it's really easy. So what I have committed to doing is when I do a presentation or when I'm coming up with a report that I need to do or anything like that, I am trying to make it accessible, and then I'm using the accessibility checker to check on it. So even if it's something that I don't need to, so our annual report that was due to our division, I went through and I made sure it was accessible, because that's the way that I practice. And it becomes kind of like when I was talking about captioning videos, it's just part of my process that I do when I'm coming up with a document or a presentation. And the good thing is you never know with a presentation. It may be that a presentation you're doing, if you're doing it for maybe another entity, like one I did this week, and then they said, we're going to post it on our website. I was like, oh, good thing I was making sure that I was checking for accessibility, because it actually is going to be posted. Even though no one asked for an accessible presentation, it's going to be posted on their website. So I need to make sure that it's accessible. So big tip, super easy to use. Justin, you're muted.
Wow, such a rookie mistake. I was going to say we have a poll here, but I'm going to skip this poll and give you the cheat code to it. The poll question was about Braille and what's sort of the estimated Braille percentage of use of Braille. And I had percentages that were like, I can't remember exactly. I want to say it was like 10, 30, 50, 70% of blind people use Braille. And I wanted you to tell me what percentage you thought it was. It's 10%. It's the lowest number that was listed there. And it's actually a lot of numbers say less than 10%. A lot of times we think, oh, blind people read Braille. I need it to be in Braille. No, you just really need a good accessible digital document, and that is probably going to offer accessibility for most people. And the good thing is if you have an accessible digital document, turning it into Braille is super easy. So you've already done all the hard work. So we're going to talk about presenting accessible presentations. I'm going to hit again, kind of like I did with Word and other things. I pointed to some of those documents in the drive. Making sure you've got good alt text, good color contrast, sans serif, so the kind of plain fonts, not curly, not decorative. Those tend to play better for accessibility. 18 to 24 point font. Really the idea here with all of these is that somebody at the back of the room could see it, right? And when we make our font small or decorative, it really makes it hard to read. And then the last point I have here is about verifying reading order. And keeping text short. So I'm going to show you here in just a second verifying reading order, but really short text. We really try, even with these slides, to keep the slides minimal for a couple reasons. You really should be reading everything that's on the slide to the best of your ability, not necessarily verbatim, but making sure that you're keeping, you're reading out the important parts. So if you put it, folks have access to it. And then also just that cognitive overwhelm and overload. The main focus is our discussion. It shouldn't really be your eyes being glued to the slide and trying to read paragraphs of text. I talked about verifying reading order, and reading order is really important because it's the order that a piece of assistive technology would read what's on your document or your slide. You can do that in PowerPoint. PowerPoint used to be very difficult to do. They actually make it very easy now in the review tab, but I've got instructions on that in the drive. We present, when we look at something visually, we kind of know the order that it's in based on how things are organized, but we have to explicitly tell assistive technology that order, and that's how you do it in Microsoft PowerPoint.
Yeah, and I'll give a great example of that as we transition. So our first slide in this presentation, I checked the reading order, and the reading order that I put it in, I checked with Justin after I did it, but the title of this presentation is in the middle of the slide, but I felt like that should be the first thing that the screen reader would read to him, because as a visual person, I would be looking at that middle part for the title, and then the accessibility in Aggieland as who is kind of sponsoring it. So the order that I put it in wasn't the visual order, but it was how we would process it as someone who is sighted. So
right.
I think that's a good example of how the reading order does make a difference, because Justin would want to know the name of the presentation first in order to kind of determine where to go from there.
That's right.
So describing image and slide content is, Justin talked about this a little bit, but this is really important, and another one of my pet peeves. I think I have a lot of pet peeves. But it's making sure that you are saying what's on the screen. So sometimes it may be a little bit easier in a Zoom kind of presentation, but we all have a tendency to put a slide on the screen, or even in the Zoom. Hopefully you don't say this, although I know people used to, but would say, you can all read, so I'm not going to read that slide. That is incredibly offensive, because there are probably people in the room that can't read it for a lot of reasons. You know, they could have just had their eyes dilated and they can't read it. There could be a lot of reasons. So it's really important to describe what's on the screen so that people will know it. I will also share that we have had times where there have been presenters who have come to do presentations, and I have 2 staff members who are blind, and they will put up a slide that has a visual joke. So it's a picture, it's a cartoon, it's something, and they put the picture up and people in the audience laugh, and then they just move on and they don't really acknowledge it. Well, then that's just left people out of the conversation. And we know, all of us know how it feels to be left out from different things. But it's really, really awkward when you're in a room and people are laughing and you really don't know what they're laughing at. So really, really important to describe the pictures that you see. The other thing that I think is cool about it, as it's, you know, again, part of the practice that I do just because of what I do as a job, it makes me think about everything I put on the slide. So if I'm going to describe everything on the slide, or I'm going to say all the words that are on the slide, it makes me think, why did I put it there? If I feel like I don't want to say it out loud for whatever reason, or it's too much to say, if it's too much to say, it's too much to have on the slide. There's not a reason for having it. So, you know, if you're just putting a little funny picture in the corner and you don't want to talk about it in the presentation, then don't put it in there, because there's not really a purpose. Unless you're going to describe it. So I think that's just something really to think about as you present. Try to make that as part of your practice. Talk about what's on the slide. We say read aloud. That doesn't mean read aloud all text on your slides. None of us want that. But we do want you to say everything on the slide, because again, not everybody is able to read it, process it, and be able to listen to someone at the same time. So just make sure that you talk about everything that's on there. When people put big charts on a screen and then they don't talk about what it's about, you know, you may not be able to understand, depending on what the material is about, what's the point of this chart. Even if you can visually see it, if they're not going to talk about it and why it's important, or, you know, 25% of the people X and 10% X, and why it's important, then it may be that I'm not understanding it because I'm not from that field. So there could be a lot of reasons to describe it, but it's just really important to describe everything that is you're presenting visually. And then if you have any kind of group or discussion-based activity, so some of the things that we do, especially when we're working with students, we're going to have either interviews or discussions or speeches or things like that, where people are going to be somewhat spotlighted in some way or another. So again, it could be over Zoom or it could be in person. Really thinking about the goals and outcomes of these activities. So we talked in the very beginning about being in a Zoom meeting and having to go into a breakout room and then kind of having to communicate with people. And there may be people who that's really challenging for. So if you're going to have activities where, especially students, but anyone is going to have to be spotlighted in some way or another, making sure you think about how would someone with anxiety or maybe a speech disability, how would that impact them? And is there maybe another way that you could do it? So If for some reason somebody was going to have to stand up and say something in front of the group, would there be a way to maybe do it in a smaller group, or maybe letting people choose who their group members are, or maybe having the option to do something alone or with other people? So a lot of times we'll say, you know, get together with a group and discuss. If somebody chooses not to get together with a group and kind of have their own, that would be okay. Or maybe you even encourage that. Either, you know, think for yourself and write some ideas down, jot some ideas down, or get with some other people. So thinking about how you can just make it more inclusive for people who may struggle with that social component of it. Or are there other activities that you could do instead that would still meet those same goals that you're trying to meet?
That's right. I'm going to take us home with the last step, which is progress. It's thinking about where have we been, where do we want to go if we do things in the future. And it really is about assessing your accessibility. That's a tongue twister. It's asking questions like what worked well? Where would you want to improve in the future? Did anything happen that you hadn't planned for? Were there things that, you know, even as well as you planned, came up last minute that you would definitely want to incorporate in that plan or checklist in the future? You could even survey participants and ask them what went well, what didn't. Did you feel like you had access to the event? And then what would they want to see from you in the future? The things that you can do better. I love feedback. Feedback is probably my favorite thing because I want things to be as intended. And so you can ask your participants those types of things to get them to guide your efforts in the future. And then that's kind of all we have in terms of planned information. We probably have a couple minutes maybe for a question or two if we wanted to entertain that.
Yeah, and Megan is going to put a survey in the chat, and so it really is helpful. This is part of the grant project that she works on with the Center on Disability and Development, and so it's really helpful to her with their grant funding that they have some feedback. It's also important for Justin and I to know what could we improve on. Y'all, we did this in an hour and a half last time, and we took the full 2 hours this time. So we definitely needed the 2 hours, and I appreciate all of you who have stuck with us for this presentation. But if you do have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand or unmute, we would be happy to take those.
You've also got our emails here, so please send us questions.
Okay. Justin, there's people saying nice things in the chat, so that has been helpful. We appreciate all of you for being here. 2 hours is a long time out of your day, we know. If you do have questions, please feel free to reach out to us. And we know that some of you've got to go for a 3:30 meeting or something else, so we appreciate you all being here.
Thank y'all so much.